Elections, elections, elections and voting. Voting, voting, voting. Elections and voting. Episode 32. Episode 32. All right, we're going to do a real quick recap on the different types of elections. We got two types of elections. We got general elections and special elections. General elections are what we've learned about all along. It's where U.S. citizens elect their local, state, and national leaders. So where we vote for our senators, our congressmen, and our president. The majority of these elections take place in single-member districts. That means in the districts which only one candidate will win the election to a particular office. So remember we talked about how Miss Loretta Sanchez is the current representative of the district in which Santa Ana lies in. So that's what that means. General elections are held on very specific days determined by state or federal law. And anybody remember what that date is? It is the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November. Okay, on top of general elections, we then have special elections. These are sometimes called on state or local levels to make decisions by popular vote. Such decisions include whether to institute a new tax increase or who to put in office to replace an official. Sometimes officials unfortunately pass away, resign, or in some cases get impeached. Special elections are called to give voters the opportunity to remove elected officials from office. So when they are not the president or congressman or senators, sometimes we can remove them. That happened back before the first time Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor was through a special election. So it happens in California. It's happened in the past. It could happen again. Okay, administration of elections. Let's go over when are elections held. We just went over this on the last slide, so let me go over it one more time. Let's see. If I've gone over it in the past 30 seconds ago and again right now, do you think it could kind of be important? It's the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November. That is when we hold elections. Okay, moving on to how are elections conducted. On election day, citizens go to their polling places and vote on site. They just vote. There you go. Generally, 2 election judges or inspectors oversee the election. So it's not like you just go into like some chintzy little place and vote by yourself. No, there's people like watching over and making sure that people aren't like messing with the systems. Okay, origins of the ballot system. The U.S. has not always had this kind of ballot system. Citizens indicated their votes verbally at public meetings at some point. Later, officials set rules dictating that ballots must be printed for elections. So that's how that came to be. We tried to make it as unbiased as possible. In the past, there have been different types of ballots which were harder to read, easier to cheat on, and, forge. Nowadays, it's pretty much almost all electronic at this point and pretty hard to forge. So that's the good part about that. The secret ballot. The ballot system changed, in 1888 with the introduction of the secret ballot. I probably should have talked about that earlier. Sometimes it's also called the Australian ballot because it started in Australia. The secret ballot allows voters to choose candidates in private. So when you go into the voting booth, there's like a little curtain around you so nobody can see who you're voting for. So people can't judge you based on your vote. Yeah. We also have absentee ballots. An absentee ballot is a ballot requested by the voter prior to election day. And then they'll mail it to you. And they'll mail it to you probably a little bit ahead of time. And then you mail it back. And then you can cast your vote that way. People will do that if they know they're going to be out of town on election day. And they should vote even if they're out of town. So they'll get their ballots a little bit early. Or a lot of people who get absentee ballots actually are college students. Because you're not in your district sometimes, a lot of times, college students don't go to college in the district that they're registered in. Let's take Miss Seth, for example. When I was living in LA, when I was going to USC, Fortunately, USC was only a 45-minute drive from Irvine, so on election day, I actually drove down to Irvine to vote. But I had a lot of friends who didn't want to make that drive, and so they requested absentee ballots. So they would get the ballot mailed to them, they would vote, and then they'd mail it back. That way they could still vote without having to drive home to their district. That pretty much covered voting by mail as well. It's not done very often, and it's not the preferred method because sometimes it takes longer to get to a person to count that vote. So it's not recommended. If you can vote in person, that's what I would say. And lastly, contested elections. Sometimes, once the ballots have been counted, the results are announced. Someone challenges or contests the results of the election. When did that last happen? Anybody remember? In 2000, in Florida. Yeah. So they had to recount it. And that can happen, and it's kind of a pain in the butt, but it happens. Yeah. Okay, we've talked about how we vote. Let's talk about our voting requirements. The age, the citizenship, the residence, and the registration status. So, up until 1971, all but 4 states set the minimum voting age to 21. However, during the 1960s, many people had argued to change the voting age. They said that if an 18-year-old could legally marry as well as be drafted in the armed forces, they should also be allowed to vote. So the legal age to vote in the United States is 18. The next requirement is that you must be a U.S. citizen to vote. You cannot vote in any state if you are not a U.S. citizen. However, there's no difference between a native-born citizen and a naturalized citizen. So even if you're not a citizen because you were born on U.S. soil, if you went through the naturalization process, meaning you got your green card and then you took the citizenship test and all of that good business, then you can still vote. Doesn't matter what type of citizen you are as long as you are a citizen. Next, residency. Residency requires for voting from Wow, I can talk. Woo. Residency requirements for voting vary from state to state. However, most states require that you must be a legal resident in the state for at least 30 days in order to vote in its elections. And lastly, registration status. There is not a single state in the U.S. where you can vote unless you are registered. Every single person who wants to vote or who is a citizen and has the civic duty to vote needs to register to vote.
Sure.